I used to think trust was the strongest part of our marriage. When Lena sat me down that quiet Sunday morning, her voice wrapped in soft, thoughtful tones, I didn't hesitate to give her what she asked for. She said she needed space, to heal, to grow, to work through things she couldn't quite name. She'd been feeling off lately, disconnected from herself. Therapy, self-care, solo walks, time. That's all she needed. And I, being the man who vowed to support her through everything, gave her exactly that. At first, I admired her resolve. She had a new therapist she'd found through a friend, someone who specialized in emotional clarity and inner work. Her sessions were scheduled for the evenings, twice a week, sometimes 3. Lena always returned looking lighter, more alive, almost radiant. She claimed therapy was doing wonders, that she was finally facing things she buried for years. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but the glow didn't look like healing. It looked like someone had breathed fire back into her, but not the kind you get from quiet reflection or journaling. It was the kind of fire someone else lights in you, a spark, reignited by touch, by laughter, by intimacy. Still, I stayed silent. I'm not the kind of man who invades. I wasn't going to read her texts or track her location, but I noticed the subtle shifts. The way she lingered in front of the mirror longer than usual. The way she hummed as she poured her tea. The late sessions that sometimes turned into overnights because it was too emotional to drive home, and she stayed at a friend's place to decompress. And yet, I trusted her. Or at least I trusted the version of her I thought I knew, until that Thursday. I had been browsing gift ideas online when I had the idea to send a thank you basket to her therapist. Something small, chamomile teas, candles, maybe a handwritten card expressing my gratitude. After all, if someone was helping my wife find herself again, they deserved a gesture. So I called the clinic Lena claimed she visited. I asked for the therapist by name. "Dr. Reynolds." The receptionist hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir, we don't have a Dr. Reynolds on staff. Are you sure it's our clinic?" My stomach dropped. I repeated the name. The receptionist checked again. Nothing. No record of a Reynolds. And when I asked about Lena? Silence. "There's no one by that name in our system." The breath left my lungs. My hands were cold, heart pounding like it wanted to escape my chest. I thanked the woman and hung up, my fingers trembling as I placed the phone back on the table. That night I lay in bed beside Lena as she scrolled through her phone, telling me how deep tonight's session had been. I nodded, said nothing, and smiled like the fool she assumed I was. But my mind was already made up. Tomorrow I would follow her. Not because I didn't trust her anymore, but because she'd already made it clear that wasn't the man she needed to heal with. The next day I left work early, claiming a headache. In truth, my head had been spinning since that phone call with the clinic. I couldn't sit still in the office. Pretending spreadsheets and strategy meetings mattered when the woman I had promised my life to might be constructing hers around lies. Lena had an evening session scheduled again, this time at 6. She left the house in that familiar navy coat she only wore when she wanted to appear polished. Her hair brushed into soft waves, lips tinted with just enough color to look effortless but alluring. She kissed my cheek like she always did. Warm, soft, routine. A gesture that used to ground me now felt like it was trying to bury something. 10 minutes after she drove off, I followed. It wasn't hard. She didn't suspect a thing. I kept a few cars back, driving with my lights off once the sun dipped low enough. My heart thudded with every turn she made, every red light that brought me closer. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe her pulling into a clinic parking lot, maybe meeting someone for dinner as a cover-up. I had hoped, despite everything, that this was a misunderstanding I'd laugh about later. But when she pulled into a quiet, tree-lined street in a neighborhood we had no connection to, something inside me went cold. She parked outside a brick apartment complex, the kind with no buzzer, just numbered mailboxes and a walkway that wrapped around the side. I pulled over a few houses down, cut the engine, and sat in silence, watching. She stepped out of her car, adjusting her coat, smoothing her hair in the side mirror. There was no nervousness, no hesitation in her movements. This wasn't a slip, it was rehearsed. She had done this before. Lena walked up the steps and stopped at Unit 2B. She didn't knock. The door opened before her knuckles could touch it. A man stood in the doorway. Miles. I knew his name now. I didn't know how I knew, maybe from one of the few times she mentioned a colleague who understood her on a deep level, someone she could talk to when things got heavy. I had filed it away without thinking. Until now, he was taller than me, clean-cut with that quiet, introspective look, bookstore handsome, the kind of man women trusted with their secrets. He opened the door with a smile that suggested this was his routine too, and Lena walked right into his arms. Her bag slipped off her shoulder as she leaned into him. They didn't notice me. I didn't want them to. My instincts screamed to confront them right there, to march up those steps and demand answers. But the part of me that had been wounded into silence held back. No, not tonight. Tonight I needed proof. Not for revenge, not even for closure, but because if I ever started to doubt my memory of this moment, I'd need something to look at, to remind myself that I hadn't imagined it. I lifted my phone slowly, hands shaking, and took the photo. In it, Lena's face is turned up, laughing, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. It was the kind of smile that made promises without words, the kind that was once mine. Miles leaned in and brushed her cheek, and they disappeared inside together, the door shutting behind them with the soft finality of betrayal. I sat in the car for a while after that, long enough for the dashboard clock to blur. My fingers were numb around the steering wheel. I don't know what I felt. Rage, heartbreak, disbelief, they all collapsed into something hollow. I realized, as I sat in the stillness, that I didn't feel shocked. I felt confirmed. My instincts hadn't lied to me. Lena had. Eventually, I drove home. I left the house dark when I got back, sat in the living room with nothing but the ticking of the wall clock and the slow, heavy pulse of my own thoughts. I stared at the front door like I was waiting for her to walk in with another lie. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. The image was enough to keep me awake. The next morning I called the clinic again, not to question this time, but to confirm. Still no record of Lena. Not under her name, not under any alias, not even a matching birth date. The receptionist apologized again. I told her not to worry. I already had what I needed. By the time Lena walked through the door that evening, flushed and bright-eyed, saying something about breakthroughs and deep inner work, I simply nodded. I asked if she wanted tea. She smiled. She thought the lie was still whole. She didn't notice that I had already started collecting the pieces. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Lena moved through the house like everything was normal. Folding laundry, humming in the kitchen, sharing trivial updates from her sessions. Her lies had a rhythm to them now, practiced, almost musical. But underneath the melody, I could hear the dissonance. I knew too much to fall for it again. And still I played my part. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't always explode. Sometimes it simmers. Sometimes the silence becomes more violent than words. I didn't confront her right away. I let her speak freely, nodding when she told me about her breakthroughs, even offering the occasional encouraging word. It wasn't kindness, it was preparation. You see, when someone builds a lie so carefully, brick by brick, the most satisfying justice is to let them walk confidently inside before lighting the match. By Friday, I had everything I needed. Photos. A printed confirmation from the clinic that she'd never been a client, a time-stamped call log, and the image of her walking into his apartment, into his arms, was burned into my mind with such clarity that I could have described the scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the dining table with the manila envelope in front of me, untouched, sealed like a final letter to the version of my life I was about to destroy. It felt ceremonial in a way, like I was preparing an offering to truth itself. Saturday morning arrived the way heartbreak often does, quietly. Lena was in the shower, singing faintly behind the door. I set the envelope on her side of the bed. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. By the time she stepped out, towel wrapped around her hair, the bathroom still fogged with steam, her eyes landed on the envelope. Her smile faltered. She didn't move at first, just stared, as if it might disappear if she blinked long enough. But curiosity, no, fear, got the better of her. She opened it slowly, hands trembling just enough to betray her calm. The clinic confirmation came first. I watched her scan the paper, confusion morphing into dread. Then came the photo, the moment captured in stillness. Her body wrapped around another man, her expression unguarded. She looked at me then, not with panic, not even guilt, but with something far worse. Defeat. "Adam," she whispered, voice barely audible, "I can explain." Of course she could. They always think they can. She probably rehearsed it too. Blame confusion. Say it wasn't physical until recently. Pretend Miles was just someone who helped her feel seen. The script was ready, but I wasn't. "No," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. "Don't insult both of us by pretending you're surprised." Lena closed her eyes, clutching the photo to her chest as if she could hide the evidence by sheer will. "It started small, I swear. I didn't mean for it to happen. And yet it did. Repeatedly," I replied coldly. "You didn't just fall into someone's arms, Lena. You packed your healing into a bag, wrapped it in perfume and deception, and brought it into another man's apartment. That's not a mistake. That's a decision." She sank onto the edge of the bed, the towel slipping slightly as she leaned forward. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to find something for myself. I felt lost." "Unseen." "No," I cut her off. "You weren't unseen. You were ungrateful." Lena flinched. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the sight of her. "Do you know what hurts the most? It's not that you cheated. It's that you used the language of healing, of self-care, to cover it. You made me feel guilty for questioning you. You made me feel like doubting you was a failure of support." Her voice cracked, the first sign of real emotion. "I didn't mean to manipulate you, but you did. Every time you came home glowing from a session, every time you kissed me goodnight with someone else's lips still warm on yours, you chose your lie over my dignity." The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. She finally spoke, voice small. "Are you going to leave?" "I already did," I said, nodding toward the door. "You just didn't notice." I walked away, grabbing my coat and keys. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth mourning anymore. Outside, the world was still the same. Cars passed, kids played down the street, a neighbor watered his lawn, but something in me had shifted permanently. Later that evening, I received a message from her. It wasn't an apology, not really, just a string of fragmented thoughts. Excuses, attempts at emotional clarity, confessions masked as self-awareness. I didn't respond. Instead, I dropped a printed copy of the photo into a second envelope. This time, no words, no explanation, just the image. Truth, frozen in time. I mailed it to her office. If she wanted to pretend she was healing, let her do it in the shadow of the truth. Let her look at that photo and remember what she called space. Because it wasn't growth she was chasing. It was escape, and escape always comes with a cost. Lena didn't answer for 2 days after I sent the photo to her office. I imagine she didn't expect me to remain this silent, to vanish so completely from the script of her life. She was used to me being steady, being available. That was the role I played for 15 years. The husband who held everything together, the patient one, the safe one. But something had cracked open the moment I saw her walk into another man's apartment. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel fire. I felt done. I stayed with a friend across town. Ben, an old college buddy who didn't ask questions when I showed up at his door with a duffel bag and a look that said, "Don't push." He offered me whiskey, silence, and a spare room. I took all 3. Every night I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the ceiling fan creak and thinking about the story Lena had been telling people, about how she was working on herself, how she was reclaiming her peace. I wondered how many people had bought into it, how many had unknowingly become accomplices in her theater of reinvention. On the 3rd day, she called. I let it ring out. She left a message. Her voice was strained but careful. "Adam, I know you're angry. I understand. I need a chance to talk. Please. For closure, if nothing else. Closure." That word had been abused so thoroughly by people like her, those who destroy and then beg for clean endings as if tidy explanations could vacuum away the wreckage. There would be no closure, not from me, just consequences. It didn't take long for the ripple effect to begin. Lena's story began to unravel within her circle. Friends who once praised her emotional awareness started asking questions, small ones at first. One of them reached out to me through social media, delicately phrased, as if trying to confirm a rumor without taking a side. "I heard you and Lena are taking space. I hope everything's okay. She mentioned therapy, said you were supportive." I didn't respond directly, I just sent a single image. The photo, within hours, Lena's carefully curated narrative of growth and reflection began to fray at the edges. Her friend group, those yoga and wine night companions who once reposted her quotes about self-worth and feminine energy, began to go quiet. Apparently, betrayal disguised as enlightenment doesn't sit well when the mask slips. A week later, I received a message from her cousin Marissa. She didn't mince words. "I'm sorry, Adam, I had no idea. She made it sound like you were distant, unavailable, but what she did, it's indefensible. You didn't deserve that." "No, I didn't." And Miles? He disappeared almost as quickly as he appeared. From what I heard through the grapevine of social media and secondhand whispers, he began pulling away once things became complicated. The fantasy was over. When real life knocked on the door, when Lena's lies turned into headlines in her personal world, he folded. Cowards rarely stick around when the betrayal stops feeling poetic. He never answered Lena's calls after she confronted him with the fallout. She'd bet everything on a man who didn't even have the courage to stand beside her when the truth came crashing in. Meanwhile, I had begun the quiet, brutal process of rebuilding, not my life, not yet, but my understanding of it. I met with a lawyer. I opened a separate account. I had my name taken off shared utilities, canceled joint credit cards, and started withdrawing my presence from every part of the home we once shared. I didn't yell. I didn't beg for an apology. I simply removed myself, piece by piece, brick by brick, the same way she had removed her honesty. The moment that solidified everything came 2 weeks later. I returned to the house for a final pickup. Lena was there, standing in the kitchen, wearing the same sweater she used to steal from me. Her eyes were hollow, makeup faded under the weight of too many sleepless nights. The kitchen smelled of burnt coffee. "You could have told me," she said quietly, barely above a whisper, "before sending it to my office. You didn't have to humiliate me." I tilted my head. "You mean the same way you humiliated me, except you dressed it up in therapy talk and called it self-care?" She looked away. "I didn't plan for it to happen like this," she murmured. "That's the problem, Lena. You didn't plan. You just did, and hoped the rest of us would stay too numb to notice." She moved toward me, hesitating. "Do you still love me?" A simple question. Once, my answer would have come instantly. But now? I looked at her and saw the outline of a woman I once adored, now hollowed out by cowardice and deflection. "I think I loved someone who didn't exist," I said, "and I'm mourning him more than you." She didn't speak after that. She just nodded slowly, lips trembling, eyes glassy. But I had no sympathy left. Not because I hated her, but because she spent the last year weaponizing the very thing I gave freely, trust, and once that's gone, all that's left is silence. Some endings don't come with fireworks, no shouting matches, no tearful last embraces, just quiet decisions made in empty rooms. Lena and I never sat down to dissect the ruins. There was no post-mortem on our marriage, no effort to assign percentages of blame or redefine the timeline of what we once were. That part of our story ended the moment I stopped engaging, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away without giving the person who betrayed you another line in your script. The divorce moved quickly, surprisingly so. When you're done, really done, there's nothing left to negotiate. I didn't want to fight over plates or paintings. I didn't care about the furniture, the house, or who got which vacation photo album. The memories were scorched anyway. I kept what I needed to live. The rest, she could have it. Let her decorate her new version of the truth however she liked. The people around us, our mutual friends, our families, began choosing sides, or rather the truth did that for them. Some stayed silent, unwilling to admit they'd seen the cracks forming long before I did. Others reached out quietly, apologizing for not noticing sooner or for ever questioning my silence. I didn't blame them. Most people don't know how to respond to emotional betrayal that hides behind words like healing and self-growth. Lena kept posting online for a while. Her social media, once filled with affirmations and filtered photos of progress, now turned into vague quotes about transformation, loss, and letting go of people who don't support your journey. But the comments were no longer supportive. The same people who once cheered for her self-discovery began asking the hard questions. What happened to Adam? Why did you lie about therapy? Eventually, she deleted most of her posts. Her silence said more than any caption ever could. Miles, from what I heard, didn't stay long in the picture. The emotional sanctuary he provided her behind closed doors collapsed under the weight of real consequences. He wasn't in it for the fallout, just the fantasy. And when the lights came on, he vanished, like a shadow that had overstayed its welcome. I never reached out to him. I didn't need revenge. I had the truth. And that was enough. In the months that followed, I began living again. Not in the loud, performative way people expect after heartbreak, but in small, deliberate steps. I started running in the mornings again, something I hadn't done since the early years of our marriage. I reconnected with old friends who reminded me who I was before I became the husband trying to be enough. I read more, cooked more, even traveled alone for the first time in years. Each moment was a reclaiming of space, of time, of myself. People often ask what healing looks like after betrayal. The truth? It's not one thing. It's a series of quiet choices. It's standing in the grocery store and not picking up her favorite brand of coffee out of habit. It's sitting in the car and not replaying the last argument in your head. It's waking up one morning and realizing that you didn't think about her at all, and feeling no guilt about it. I don't hate Lena. I'm not sure I ever will, but I no longer see her as the woman I built my life with. She became someone else while I wasn't looking, while I was too busy holding the door open for her healing, unaware she was slipping out through the back. Trust, when weaponized, doesn't just break love, it breaks identity. But here's what it also does. It forces you to rebuild, not to become someone new, but to return to who you were before the lie convinced you that you were never enough. And in that return, I found something Lena never could. Behind those closed doors with Miles, peace.